We're going to start tonight in chapter 15 of the 16th book of Israel, Sea of Glass. And this was actually, the date of this sermon was 4/30/2016. This is actually the evening service on the last day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread. So always a great, a great exciting day, the last day of the feast. I always look forward to the sermons that Pastor brings in the evening. There, it usually gives us, really some great information there. And this sermon is really no exception. He's actually going to be going over Revelation chapter 10 and explaining some of the words and giving us a very clear meaning of what Revelation 10 is actually speaking of. So even if you don't have your books of Israel, you may want to open up to Revelation chapter 10 and follow along as, in just a few verses. We'll get into starting in verse 1, and we'll go over some of these things here. And Pastor really gives us a great understanding of Revelation chapter 10. Okay, in verse 1 here it says, Shalom everyone. Well, first I'll read you the title here. It's chapter 15. Yahweh is with his house. His house is gathering at this time, the biggest gathering of all. And remember, a few weeks ago, Pastor said that he mentioned how this gathering is taking place. Do you remember what he said? It's a gathering in the mind. They're being gathered in their mind. They might not see we might not see the great flow of people yet at this time, but that gathering is taking place, and it starts with the mind. It's just like we can read in the baptism booklet where it talks about how a person receives a spirit of calling, something clicks, maybe they hear something, they read something, and and it starts a process. Well, that's what this gathering. That's how the gathering is taking place at this time. It's a gathering in their mind. Their minds are being opened. That veil is being lifted. So again, this is 4/30/2016, the special evening service of the Feast of Unleavened Bread. And verse 1 here, Pastor says, Shalom everyone, and of course a joyful cheering and praise to Yahweh with the waving of the palm branches. And then he says, I keep expecting Yahweh to rejoice where we can hear him. And I thought that was kind of an interesting statement, wondering what that would be like to hear Yahweh rejoicing. But it's interesting, Pastor mentioned that. Now in verse 3, if you look to verse 3, we finally see the evidence that the Catholic Church, the Vatican, the leader of the kings of the earth, is preparing for what they call just war. And we've heard these terms before, a just war. And what's really being said is a justified war, justifiable. They want to justify being able to go and attack a nation or a group of people. That's what they're referring to here when they say a just war. And they're getting the people set up for it. And we even saw this week with the attack that was done here in the United States, where the man used a truck and killed several people, injured some. And, right away there was a great deal of condemnation towards this man, and of course the nationality that he was. And, that has generated over the years, a lot of hatred for certain groups of people. And we've seen that through the articles and news articles that have come out to where Muslim people are being targeted. They have nothing to do with some of these incidents that take place, but nevertheless, the hate crimes against these people have greatly risen because of the acts of one or two. So we see this just war that they're preparing for, and they want to get the people ready for it and set up for it, and you have to do that through generating some type of hatred, just like when we saw with the 9/11 incident, and all the cheering and the praise and the president saying, the people that did this, they'll soon hear all of us, and everybody was, rejoicing in that as it was getting them ready, set up for a war. Well, they're leading them to believe that they can have a just war and wipe out so many people and then say, and then they will have peace with Catholics only. And that's their goal, to leave only the Catholics left alive. The Christians have one of the horns of the two-horned beast that is in Revelation 13. You've got Revelation 12, if you remember, the beast that comes out of the sea. Okay, and this is how the Holy Roman Empire rose up among the multitudes, nations, and tongues by force, taking captives and forcing people into slavery like they were in Egypt. And let's look down at verse 5, and this is part of the Catholic Church and their doctrine right here, what the Vatican is saying. This was an article that was published, and this is just a small excerpt from the article, but you can kind of see now about this just war, a justifiable war, and what they intend to do here. It says, as with all moral acts, now you have to kind of, look at how they're using these words, not correctly. The Vatican says the use of force to obtain justice must comply with three conditions to be morally good. Number one here, the damage inflicted by the aggressor of the nation or community of nations must be lasting, grave, and certain. So they intend with this to make one clean sweep. They are going to be nuclear wars. So, forget about love your enemy, do well to those who hate you and persecute you and all that. Forget all about that. And like the preacher's son said, sometimes we have to be like King David. We're going to have to go in there and show them how strong we can be. And that's what they're saying. That's their just wars that they're calling for. They want to justify being able to go to war. Of course, it generates a lot of money and income and stirs the economy and so forth. So they want these just wars. Okay, that's what they're planning on, nuclear wars that will bring this about. And that's kind of the end of that topic that Pastor was bringing at that point. And in verse 6 he says, now in Revelation 10. And this is where he starts to go through Revelation 10. And I thought it was just a very excellent sermon in explaining these words. And one thing I like to do when Pastor does explain a passage like this in Scripture, I'll write the date, in my book of Yahweh, so that if I ever need to, I can go back there and look and see what was said, because you can only put so many notes down in a timely manner. But I found that writing the date down there is great reference to be able to go back and find the sermon that gives you that information. But in verse 6 here it says, now in Revelation 10, we're in this era. Okay, so this is our time period right now. In this period right now, we can see this forming, and Yahweh shows His work that is forming with it. That's you. That's us, the House of Yahweh. That work started with the written prophecy in Isaiah 2:2 and Micaiah 4:1-3, with the establishment of the House of Yahweh. The prophecies say, in the last days, I will establish my house in the chief of the nations. And we know we're in the very last days of the last days. We're in that very last part. It began in 1934, but now we're at the very, very end, the last days of the last days, that final part. It tells you where. Then he gives the names in prophecy. Every detail of this work of Yahweh is given. Well, here in Revelation 10 now, one of the young priests who went through some of this today, I noticed, Revelation 10 verse 1, and I saw a mighty Malach, a messenger. That's a messenger, and he has authority from Yahweh. And most of the time, as is the case here, written in Revelation 10:1, it's also in Revelation 18:1. It says, I saw this Malach come down from heaven, as if we could see him descending. But that's not what it means. It means he has the authority from heaven. He has the authority from Yahweh. That's what that's referring to there. So I saw this messenger. He has the authority from Yahweh. The word mighty means he comes with the strength of Yahweh. Well, the strength of Yahweh, as Malachi 4 shows, and then Yeshua showed it too, is his laws. That's what makes this messenger strong. So notice the strength of the messenger is what the messenger teaches. it's the strength of Yahweh, the laws and the prophecies that he teaches. That's why the Malach is referred to as a mighty messenger, because he brings the strength of Yahweh with him, the laws and the prophecies. So this word mighty means he is carrying Yahweh's laws of strength. Verse 8, come down from heaven, clothed with a cloud and a rainbow. And we know the colors of the rainbow there, which we wear each feast, and we have our rainbow-colored sash. Well, that needs to be covered, but I don't have time. But this rainbow is with him. All of you should know this now. Anyway, the rainbow, yes, praise Yahweh. A rainbow was upon his head, and his face was, as it were, the sun. And again, without someone to explain this, to give you the understanding here, you could get real easily mixed up. Okay, just like the man said, how can I understand it unless I have a teacher? And this has to do with a prophecy that shows he will be of quick understanding. Quick understanding. So he's very quick to understand the Scriptures. And as we're going to see here in chapter 10, that he's given the book. And he's told to eat this book. But it really is to open up the book. He's given the mind to understand what's written in the book. Okay? And this has to do with a prophecy that shows he will be of quick understanding and bright and shiny. Okay, now remember his face as it were the sun. So it means bright and shiny with Yahweh's light, carrying Yahweh's light, and his feet as pillars of fire. So, it's not that his feet are burning all the time, but he's very zealous. And that's what this is. This is zealous to do Yahweh's work. That's 10 words or less to describe it. So it gives you quite a bit of understanding in just those couple verses in Revelation chapter 10 about what is taking place here and describing this messenger that is very strong with Yahweh's laws. And he had a little book open in his hand. He had a book. And that would be more understandable if you thought of that as having a book opened. So he has the book opened. And remember who opened the seals so that the last day's work could understand them? Yeshua did. That's right. Yeshua qualified to open up those seals to give this mighty Malach the understanding that he could go forth and teach. So he has this book opened, having been opened. That's what the Diaglot says too. By the way of a book having been opened. This part was fulfilled in Revelation 12, where Yahweh showed, as the great Kohan Ilya Heilerhaken showed this morning, of the woman who prepared this Malach for his job, in preparation for his job. And what was that preparation? It was the reading each night with the lamplight, studying the Scriptures, and himself reading them over and over, and even his dad saying, how come you want to keep reading the same thing over and over? I could understand you reading it one time, but several times. That was the preparation for his job. Yahweh preparing him to do this job. So having been open means having been taught or started to be taught in this teaching, but not completely, as we see in the rest of this chapter. She started it, and that was referring to Pastor's mother, who diligently taught the laws of Yahweh to her children. My family started it, but they didn't know it all. Remember, that was that's what got everything going there and put that love there for the reading of the Scriptures. And even we know that it was something genuine because Pastor's given us the examples of where when he was down by the creek, and he would be fishing, but having his Scriptures there reading, showing that it was something of a great love and desire for him. Okay, verse 3, which is actually verse 12 here in the sermon here, and he cried with a loud voice. Well, what was he crying? And verse 6, and vowed by him who lives forever and ever, who is Yahweh, of course, who created heaven and the things that are in it, and the earth and the things that are in it, and the sea and the things which are in it, that there should be time no longer. And this is what the Malach has been crying out, showing that the time is drawing very near, that there's going to be time no longer. The delays that, there's not going to be any more delays. We're going to see this. It's going to go. And, like the other prophets said, which we always have to take line upon line and precept upon precept, here a little and there a little, which Pastor explains, you have to have this whole book in your mind at one time. But remember, the prophet said, although it seems slow, wait for it surely will come. So we're going to see that there's no more delays. It's here. It's ready to go. We're in the end of this generation. The very things that Yeshua said we would see, we do see. We see sin at its peak, the destruction, the wars and the rumors of wars, the disasters from the firmament being destroyed. We see all these things. But verse 7, but in the days of the voice of the seventh Malach, when he will begin to sound, the great secret of Yahweh would be finished, as he declared to his servants the prophet. With this seventh work, it's going to be finished. So you see, it's right now. I mean, this is our time period right now where we see this, the scriptures being fulfilled. And the voice which I heard from heaven spoke to me again and said, go, take the little book, the book that has been opened already in your mind. Take this book and start eating it, this little book. Okay, let's look down to verse 20. And we're going to jump over now to Revelation chapter 11. And this is where Pastor had mentioned, I believe this feast, he made mention to it earlier in the feast, but this is where he mentions the reed. The reed. And what was the reed? It was a writing instrument. It was a pen. It was a pen of a writer. It was something that you write with. And Revelation 11 verse 1, and there was given me a reed. Well, that word reed right there, David did some work on it this morning. In fact, I guess there's quite a bit of it. And he brings out that, and Lingua Sacra by David Levi says, this word reed right here is the pen of a ready writer. And we know that that's one thing that Pastor has always done, that Yisrael Hawkins has always done, is written. He's always writing. He's writing something, and we see it through the work that's published each month through the Prophetic Word magazines and the monthly newsletters. So it's the pen of a ready writer. The pen of a ready writer, or one who's made ready to write. And look how accurately that describes this mighty Malach, this seventh Malach. He's a writer, and he's been given this reed, okay, to do his job in writing. And even remember when Pastor was in when he was in jail there, what did he want? He wanted some paper and a pen, so he could write. It's something that he's always done. He's a writer, so he's given this reed, which I've spent my life doing. Here's another one that David brought me this morning. Breslau and also David's son and Harkavy, they say the same thing. Hebrew Old Testament, the pen of a writer. The pen of a writer. Well, that's what's given to one of the witnesses who vows by the one who lives forever. That's one of those things where, I've always overlooked that. I never would have put that together and said, man, that's a writer right there. He's given a reed. It's written in a way, it's meant to hide certain things, and that's what, through the translations they've done, they purposely hid things, but Yahweh is giving the knowledge back to his house, and, we should be very thankful we have that great knowledge given to us. Okay, let's look at verse 23. So Revelation 11, verse 1 again, and there was given me a reed, this pen, it's like a measuring rod, and the Malach stood saying, rise and measure the temple. And here's a little bit more to it, but we'll actually look at this word measure now and see how that fits into Revelation 11 verse 1 and the job that's given to the seventh Malach. Now this is studying it and seeing why the temple was. In other words, get to work on this first, but it also means to measure it and show the prophecies concerning it. All of this is put in that one little word there that they translated measure. Measure the temple of Yahweh and the altar and its confines. Remember, it's It's given to the Gentiles, which we've been told before it should be to the nations, and that's we see that that's what the nations have. They have control of that area right now, and there's a lot of fighting surrounding it. But it's given over to them at this point. Let me see here. Okay, verse 25. And I will give to my 2 witnesses. So here starts their work. And I thought that was, again, pretty interesting here. So it says here, here the work is starting. So we see here, I'll give to my 2 witnesses. Here starts their work. I will give to my 2 witnesses to perform their prophetic offices, and they will foretell events. And they are the ones that were given this job to foretell future events. That is their job, to prophesy to many nations. And in turn, that becomes our job as well. Not that we go out and prophesy, but we support the House of Yahweh. We back up the one who is prophesying. We do our part in allowing that message to go out. The House of Yahweh, yours and mine together. That is our job, and we're doing it. We're reaching every nation on the face of the earth right now, and they're wanting to come by the thousands, thousands, and thousands. And remember, it's the gathering that's taken place. It's a calling. It's an opening up of the mind, how they're being gathered at this time. Okay, let's turn to page 164, and let's look at verse 28. Now, verse 4, and this is continuing in Revelation 11, these are, as it were, the 2 olive trees, and as it were, the 2 lamps of the 7-lamp lampstand. Well, this describes the work. And remember, that's in Revelation, chapter 4, is where we see that lampstand actually represents the complete plan of Yahweh. And as we see it displayed here for us each Sabbath, that's what we should remember, that it's a reminder to us that the complete plan of Yahweh is given to the last day's work. No other work before us had that understanding open to them. Only the last day's work of Yahweh knows the complete plan. And remember, we see that even with Daniel, as educated as that man was, he still didn't have the complete plan like the last day's work of Yahweh has. Well, this describes the work. Remember, it's written here a little and there a little. And we see that the prophet Isaiah said that in Isaiah chapter 28, verse 10. The prophecies are all that way. The laws are that way also. Here a little and there a little. And there's why you see, as we covered in Revelation 10, where he was given this book, and the whole book was open to him. And we've heard pastors say, it's like you got to have the whole book of Yahweh or the whole plan of Yahweh in your mind to understand it. And even when he's teaching, he'll say, now don't forget that point there, but let's go over here and connect this. And that gives us a greater understanding, and that's why this here a little, there a little, it's very important, almost as a way to throw off anyone who, might try to piece something together, but without taking everything and using the here a little and there a little, they can't get the complete plan. Well, Yeshua in Hebrews chapter 4 says that he gave us the rest of the holy Sabbath as written in the laws and written in the laws, and the Sabbath was described by many of Yahweh's prophets, and Yeshua said, you're a fool if you don't believe all that the prophets had spoken. And again, even with the Sabbath, we get, parts here and there on how to keep the Sabbath day properly. Verse 29. Now look at verse 18 of that same chapter. And the nations were angry. That's again our time period right now as we see the nations being very angry. We see this with North Korea and the United States and many other countries always going back and forth. And they're very angry. Everybody's very agitated and irritated. And there's a lot of anger there. If you remember Yeshua in Matthew 24, he showed the hatred among the nations. They hate each other. This is describing what he wrote, but also what Isaiah said and was described even as far back as Cain. Okay, and he goes on here, he says, this hatred, retaliation, and vengeance, these are the wars. no one wins a war. There are no winners in war. And, you can see these, the refugee crisis that the world is facing at this time. And, very few nations want to accept, or countries want to accept these people. They're overwhelmed by the amount of people that are leaving their countries because they don't want to be killed in this war. They're the ones that are suffering from the wars. No one wins a war. A war is started and battles are fought and supposedly won until those who are left alive, or those who saw what this person did, raises up a bigger army. This has gone on since the days of Cain, and that was what Cain was, that was what Yahweh told Cain. This is what you've chosen. You've chosen a path that's going to be nothing but war, vengeance, retaliation, hatred, and so forth. There's nothing won in wars. The Catholic Church has promoted this way of war since the days of Nimrod, and we learned again more about that system that Cush begot. He brought forth this rebellious system against Yahweh's laws, and that's what we see all the way down to our very time period right now. Let's go over here. I want to make sure I cover one of these last verses. Let's look at verse 32. And this is Revelation 11:18. And the nations were angry, and your judgment is come. Well, that's translated wrath in the King James Version. But there again, they replaced the word judgment to make Yahweh look bad. To think that somebody would try to make the Creator look bad, but that's exactly what they did. And they've done it throughout the Holy Scriptures. Well, the world's authorities admit this, that they did this throughout the Holy Scriptures. They put fear instead of rejoice. They used the word fear instead of rejoice. They rendered it. They didn't translate it. You can't say that they translated it, but they rendered it. They always rendered it that Yahweh did this instead of Yahweh allowed them to do it. And that's something that, is real important for us to see, that, Yahweh doesn't bring curses down upon someone. He allows the curses to come because of the way that choices that we may make, or that mankind has made. He told them not to do it, but he allowed them to have their own way and make their own choices. Okay, and let's look at verse 35 here. It says, "Your sentence will be this if you hang in the house." And what Pastor's saying here in the previous verse is that we'll be given this ability to resurrect the prophets and apostles, and they're actually going to teach and guide the people with us. And Pastor said, yes, you're going to have this ability. He said, your sentence will be this if you hang in the house. Well, don't try to save your life by running into the world. If you do, you'll lose it. Now, I fear that some are going to lose their sense, their knowledge that they have gained here, and run off and try to hide in the world, and they're going to lose their lives for doing so. So just keep that in mind, and always remember, no matter how shaky it gets, Yahweh's promises are sure, and He's promised protection. This last day's work will not see the grave. The gates of hell will not prevail against the house of Yahweh. May Yahweh bless your understanding. If everyone would please stand, I'll turn it over to the great Kohan, Betziel Hawkins.
Shalom, everyone. You may be seated. It's an honor to speak before the called out ones here on this Sabbath evening. We're going to continue here on page 165, the 15th chapter of the 16th book of Israel. Beautiful book, The Sea of Glass. And this evening I had it setting on my desk where the sun would shine in, and that golden glow of the sunset as the sun was setting just stopped me in my tracks. I saw this book and that light coming off the purple and the gold. It was just an awesome sight, and that was a real gift. Well, we left off here in verse 35, And I want to reiterate here Pastor's intensity in his comment. He says, I fear that some are going to lose their sense. Now, he's not fearing in the sense of he's afraid, but of like something would occur to him, but he's fearful in the sense that he knows the pitfalls, he knows the challenges that people face, and if they're not rooted and grounded in the knowledge of the truth, they can be shaken, they can forget what they have learned, they forget the plan of Yahweh and where they fit into that plan, and they can lose their way. And in many cases, it's really senseless that they should. It makes sense when you see what was lacking, but it wasn't necessary. What I mean by that is that Yahweh has provided us a way to this salvation in these last days through the House of Yahweh. The answer to every problem, every challenge a person faces can be found here in the House of Yahweh, at the House of Yahweh, at the mouth of the priest. And, it takes patience. We should know by now that running off and trying to hide in this world is just not using sense. If we follow the news, if we see what's, the people in the world are running away from something as well. Sometimes they're running away from their own governments. Sometimes they're running away from their families or situations. Many are running away from something, but they're like, like the dumb dogs that can't bark, and they like the two blind men who lead each other into the ditch. These kinds of things, because they don't have the inspiration from Yahweh. They don't have a teacher to lead and guide them in a proper direction. And so it's a really sad and fruitless thing to having once been called out of that to go back into it. Something got my attention this week that I thought fit very well with this topic. And I'm just going to paraphrase the concept because I'm not promoting the book. But this is words written by an author who was their family had been part of one of these, not really refugees, but there's another word for it. Those who've been driven out, which has been in our history, in the Hebrew history. We know this from the scriptures. We've seen and read the scriptures of our people, Yahweh's people, being driven out of their homes, being driven about, destitute, living in caves and wearing skins, and they're really going through some hard, difficult times. And so this author was walking with a local, a young person, and they had come from America and returned to their the region of their homeland, of their ancestors. And they were discussing the historical events of that region. And there was a quote this person made to begin the book, and it said, "All I know is that I know nothing for certain, but that's the thing I most often forget." And I see that is the way it can be with myself and with others, that we can get headstrong and think that we know something that we really don't know for certain. Maybe it's someone's motives. Maybe it's some trial or test we're going through, and we think we know why that person did that to us, or why they did the thing they did. It's just because they're difficult, just because they're a jerk, something like this. But then when we stop and think about it and we remember that Yahweh has a plan and a purpose, and that even in our trials and tests we need to remember to be thankful and to trust Yahweh, that He's going to see us through. He's going to be with us through all these things, and is going to guide us and is going to build up our character, and we're going to come through this. But we often forget that what we think we know, really we should leave that to Yahweh, who knows all things, and trust that Yahweh will help us to see what we need to see and overcome what we need to overcome. And so in verse 36, in Revelations 11:18 goes on to say, and that you should give reward to your servants, the prophets. Now, what is a prophet but a teacher? And to all the saints. And those are the ones who were taught by the prophets, who carried out the law, who practiced the laws as the prophets did. And notice they're your servants. They're Yahweh's servants, they're Yeshua's. They're in unity with Him. You remember, Yahweh keeps telling you, fear not. Fear not. And He does that with the witnesses themselves. He tells them, fear not, I'm with you. I'm going to get you through this. Remember that, all of us. Fear not. He's talking to all of the saints, all of us, not just to pastor, not just to the witness. He's saying, I'm in complete control. I've got this. I've had it before. You can see it from the prophecies that nothing is going to wipe you out and cause you to fail. If you fail, it's going to be of your own doing, because I've given you every opportunity. If it gets that bad, I think it's worth one more shot to humble yourself before the priest and just say, like a humbled child, a son to his father, what do you want me to do, Dad? And then be prepared to carry it out. I'm the one who, He said, I'm the branch who Yahweh said would branch out and establish the house, which He did without any of us there, carried this out, and that's the reason we're here right now, because the house of Yahweh was established. Even the world knows this. They checked us out, and they were trying to pin charges on us when they tried to take the name of Yahweh, but they showed them. They said they've had this name for quite some time. It's well established. It's registered. There was nothing that could be done about it. And, just a note on how people will try to find something to pin on the house of Yahweh to bring charges against them. I want you to remember that many times their laws are a result or the consequence of some transgression taking place. Just a simple example would be like the persecution against Sabbath keepers, or those who would not eat pork. You do not break the law of Yahweh when you do not go to church on Sunday, or when you do not eat pork. It's not breaking a law. But they have throughout history created laws that put you in a position of being a quote-unquote lawbreaker. And sometimes they will try to pin something on us that they'll say, well, look, they're violating this law here. When it's really no violation, it's just them trying to deal with their own consequences of their own sins. They've, created these curses, and they've written a law to try to penalize people. They're not teaching them how to come out of sin. They're teaching them to justify it and continue in it. But Yahweh brought us through these things, as He continues to do, and raises up His house and brings forth His message. And all of this he continues to do through his witness. And then he said to Yeshua, behold this man. Yeshua is our high priest. Yahweh is talking to him, Yeshua our high priest, and Yahweh is telling him, behold this man, behold this house. Yahweh is going to establish a house. Yeshua is the leader of it, and he shows you that in Hebrews. And so Yeshua could see this, and so he made preparations for us. And he willingly put himself to the sacrifice so that he could make that way, so that our work would not be meaningless. And so that he would have that position to continue to work with us, because he trusted Yahweh. He trusted Yahweh to fulfill his promise, to raise him up from the grave, and to set him in a position of honor and a position of ability to be able to inspire this work in the last days. And because of what he did, then, we have now the book of Yahweh. We have the history that we're learning of the house of Yahweh. We're putting this all together. And with that, we recognize the signs from heaven that confirm that, yes, you are the one spoken of. The witness Israel is the one that was inspired to begin this. And everything is set on course now. We're on the right track. We just need to stay the course. Praise Yahweh. Now, as far as reverencing the name of Yahweh, to those who reverence your name, well, we have ample evidence that the name, it's been written wrong by the translators. The scriptures have been written wrong. We've been putting those things back in place according to law and the prophecies, but we see that the ones who receive this blessing, the reward, the opportunity to serve others, to bring about lasting peace, that goes to the ones who reverence the name of Yahweh and Yeshua and regard them as holy and sets them apart from the lies and traditions of this world. And so that's just another identifier for the house of Yahweh to show who we are associated with. So by taking the name of Yahweh out of the names of the Savior, the prophets, the apostles, and so forth, they do not reverence or show reverence to the name by taking it out and causing the people to forget it. Now, on that note of causing to forget, I want to briefly go back to this story, this true story. And the author was relating to this companion. They were speaking to a young person, a teenager, this scene of atrocities upon exiles. That's the word I was looking for. These distressing scenes of what had been done to these people, these exiles, some 70 years earlier. And the boy responded, with alarm, and he said, "But that never occurred. That couldn't have occurred. Surely our people could not have been so brutal," my words. But so this person, the older person speaking to them, thought that that part of history had been kept from the younger generation. Not only were they unaware of their past, their government was quote, buying history, end quote, at American universities by giving them large endowments, that's large amounts of money, to keep its barbaric past from the American university agenda, or as we would call it, a lesson plan. So a great deal of money is spent to influence the educational system, and this isn't the first time I've read this or heard this, to alter history. This was done in high school books. It's been in the news for years over time. This is also done with dictionaries and definitions. I was looking at a definition of a word that I learned many years ago in how, earlier in the House of Yahweh, and I noticed the current definitions just don't show that. I'm like, well, I know I studied that when I came to the House of Yahweh. Surely it's not missing. So I went back to the dictionary that I'd used at that time. And we go through phases like this where some of these words like that pastor uses, it becomes, they call it archaic, or it becomes old-fashioned. But, that doesn't mean those definitions aren't there. It just means they're not in common use today. And so people start to forget. The young people, if all you know is Wikipedia, you're missing out on a lot of history, a lot of details of how things, and, I've been alive now long enough to see people in their 30s and 40s now repeating things in their life that's new to them, but it's not to me, because I remember how that got started, that tradition or custom, how it got started. And, to them it's new and fascinating and surprising, and to me it's just kind of humorous, because I'm like, oh, well, I could explain that to you, And that's the way pastor is with us, he's got a long experience of history, and he could explain, if he had time, many things to you. And oftentimes he'll say, if you're having trouble with this, ask me. I want to talk to you, because he can explain it if you give him the opportunity. And there's so much that's been forgotten in the later generations, and it takes those with wisdom and knowledge of what came before to put it together and help you understand. So, how do we reverence Yahweh? How do we keep ourselves firm in the faith? Well, it starts in Isaiah 58 with the Sabbath, the first lesson. This is the pattern that all the teachers of Yahweh have followed throughout history, is that first you get them keeping the Sabbath, coming to their appointments with Yahweh. Get yourself to the house of Yahweh, to Yahweh's appointments. That's how you do it. That's how you reverence Yahweh. To those who reverence your name, small and great, and should destroy those who destroy the worth. Well, it's not actually destroying, but that's just a translation issue there. But Yahweh's not going to destroy them. In fact, He's established the house of Yahweh in the last days to give warning. And this warning even goes to the extent to explaining to them how long, in their own words, it's going to take to destroy themselves. 1 hour. It's going to take you 1 hour to destroy yourselves if you do this and you don't repent. And this, of course, is the transgressions of the laws. If you do those things, keep going against Yahweh's instruction, they're certainly getting the warning now. Okay. Revelations 3 verse 10. Because you have kept the word of my patience, I will also keep you from the hour of temptation, which will come upon all the world to test those who dwell on the earth. And that testing is a trial to let them show their way and what the result of it will be. And now we have the nuclear capability to bring this to pass. Now, heading this up, this transgression is this three-way competition between the U.S., Russia, and the Catholic Church. And the Catholic Church, and they all hope to come out on top. And of course, we know the Catholic Church has great reach and power, and it's got its grip on the leaders of the nations. We see this from Revelation, how she's got this grip on the leaders of these nations. Both Russia and the United States are under this influence. So the Catholic Church has really got an upper hand here. It's not going to be enough, but it's going to be enough for destruction. Now in verse 19, then the house of Yahweh was made open for all to see in heaven. So, Yahweh hasn't left us hidden. He's let us get the message out, and not just on earth, but even out to the universe. And back in the 90s, in the House of Yahweh, back in the time when the book, There Is Someone Out There, came out, and I knew someone at the time who was actually attracted by this message of there is someone out there, and answering these questions. Well, who is out there? And what is the nature of these beings? Who are they? Where do they come from? What do they do? And, it occurred to me that at that time, that some of the things that we were looking into, we used to come to the feast and they would show videos and information on this subject. And one of the things I recalled of people who claimed to have had conversations with these beings, or at least received information, said that it seemed to be a common theme that many times they said, you human beings have great potential. You've got great power. You just haven't realized it yet. And I thought, if that's true, I wonder if what they're seeing from us is, have they really achieved their full potential? So you have the created beings that Yahweh created, and they perform their function in the universe as they do, but there's certain limitations. And we even see this in Hillel herself, that Yahweh places limits on her. So Yahweh can show by what we're going through what they're experiencing, why they're experiencing, and if Yahweh, they covet our ability. They see us and they say, "Wow, you've got so much potential. You can, it's like with Yeshua casting out the demons. The demons seem to desire inhabiting human bodies because they could experience these things that humans could experience in some form, but not really. And Yahweh's showing them, if I gave you all of this ability, and we're a little lower than them now. We're going to be above them in ability and power. But could it be that Yahweh's showing them this? If I give you all of this, or if you had this, this is what it would come to. What you see in mankind. And so it's not just a trial for us, but it's a trial for the whole universe. That it is a message to them that, sin cannot be tolerated. Even if you're just a microbe and all you do is clean up the septic system, sin cannot be tolerated at any level. Because your enjoyment in life will be taken away if any sin is allowed to persist. Look at what the microbes are suffering today with the pollution that's in the septic systems, in the sewer systems. And it's reached up into the heavens. In Matthew 24:29, well, I better move on here. They gave me a short sermon here, so maybe I'd keep on time, but I do carry on. Yeah, I could stay here all night probably and just keep on going. But when you get into these, Pastor has packed so much into this sermon. It's incredible, even for a short one. He just really packed it in. Well, what Yahweh desires of us and what Pastor desires, He's putting His laws in our heart, Hebrews 10:16, in our heart and minds, to obey and to have peace. Like the peaceful solution, changing the hearts and minds. But he's told us, you cannot cross this line. If you do, you're going to be sunk. Let those who steal no more. Let those, fill in the blank. Just stop sinning. Make up your mind. That sin is not going to continue. Let those who fornicate, let those who lust, let those who covet, let them stop. Repent and be converted. Don't just repent, but be changed. Be converted. Convert to practicing Yahweh's laws. When you see the offerings of this world and the foolishness, just say, that's not my way anymore. That's not who I am. That's not who I represent. I want to go into Pastor's prayer on page 168 a little bit here. Like I said, Pastor just packed so much information into such a small space here. The pastor prays at the end of the feast. And I want you to take notice with some emphasis. And, some of you are going to come to confessions this evening, and sometimes we coach you a little bit if you're new on how we ought to pray. And I've said, listen to the prayers, the examples of the priest and others who pray, the future priests and so forth. And this is your example. Our Father in heaven, whose name is Yahweh. This is, and he identifies himself, Israel Hawkins. And he identifies his office, the last day's witness. Coming to you, Heavenly Father Yahweh, through Yahshua. So he comes through the authorities placed over him. And for you, it would be your counselors, the priest, and pastor, the witness Israel. Through Yahshua, our high priest and king, coming joyously before you, Father, along with your whole house that you've brought here to this one location. Notice, it is Yahweh who brought you here. Yahweh who invited you here. And for what purpose? To train them in your laws and the Peaceful Solution Character Education Program, the only strength on earth that will bring peace. And this goes back to the earlier part of this sermon, which is where our true strength is in the laws of peace, the laws of Yahweh that guide us and govern our lives. All other strengths that man has come up with. Well, let's see. What strengths has man come up with? Well, strength of freedom, the strength of liberty, the strength of democracy, the strength of technology, the strength of science, and on it goes. The strength of self-confidence, the strength of psychology. All of that comes to one conclusion: destruction. You set mankind before the universe, before heaven and earth. Let them see what their ways are bringing in a way that they can actually see it, so we know that they have vision in some manner, some way out in the universe. They're able to see as evidence our actions, activity, and behavior. Like I said, I referenced to the book, There Is Someone Out There. And he thanks Yahweh for this knowledge and gives credit and honor to Yahweh. And he acknowledges Yahweh that he is in complete control and that he's bringing us through, and that the world, while it's coming to destruction, he has built this house, a place of protection for this house. And then finally, he concludes, as I should, Father, we know we've got to, concluding the feast, and he says, people are getting ready to leave, and he says, we ask your protection upon them. We ask you to keep them ever mindful Don't listen to what's important to pastor. Don't let their thoughts wander. Don't let their heads be turned. Please inspire them, Father, in your righteousness to remember and make right choices. And I want to refer to this. These are the words of a loving Father, and I want to refer to 3rd Yachanan, verse 2 through 4. And this is what was in pastor's heart, and this was in the heart of Yachanan. Beloved, I pray above all things that you are successful and are in health. I know it is well with your soul. For I greatly rejoiced when the brothers came and testified of the truth that is in you. Just as you walk in the truth, I have no greater joy than to hear that my children walk in truth. And that's what pastor desires of us, and to see this coming feast and this coming Sabbath. So all come in the morning and join us, and may Yahweh bless your understanding. Please stand. We'll reverence Yahweh.